everybody, and welcome back to World History. So we're doing section 3 today, which actually, hold on, I need to make sure I tell you the right assignment. So, hold on, this one. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So, let's get back to the notes. So, both sides decided to wage a total war on each other, or in which we see a focus of an entire nation's resources into the war effort, and the government takes control of the entire economy. We also see economies becoming completely committed to war production, and armies ranged into the millions, where it was the goal to recruit, arm, transport, supply, send them out just as fast as we could. Now, through this, they utilized a method of conscription, or a draft, requiring all young men to be ready for military or other service. They raised taxes. Britain especially borrowed money from the United States. Most countries involved utilized a system of rationing, or a fixed amount of certain prices. They set prices, and they forbid strikes in certain industries to make sure that people stayed at work. Now, that was eventually going to change for the Germans, and it wasn't going to be in their favor with the sinking of the Lusitania. Now, they did this through a series of economic warfare, where it was Great Britain versus Germany. So Great Britain utilized a blockade, or to seal off a place to keep goods or people from entering or leaving. And they cracked down on contraband, or military supplies and raw materials needed to make military supplies. Now, this did not extend to food and clothing. This extended to things like gunpowder, certain metals that were required to make guns. Now, in a retaliation at the hands of Germany against the British, they used a U-boat blockade. And in May of 1915, they sunk a British passenger liner, the Lusitania, which also was carrying 128 Americans that died. As a result, President Wilson of the United States started to cut off diplomatic relations if any more Americans were killed. Prior to this point, American ships had been left alone because the United States had not gotten involved in the war. We stayed out of it for as long as we could. Lusitania was kind of one of the biggest things that motivated us to join the war, simply because this was the first loss of American life in World War I. Now, Germany agreed to give a warning and restrict submarine warfare in future to make sure American ships weren't targeted, but they weren't going to hold on to that. So it was also a propaganda war. So when we talk about it, propaganda was used to control public opinion and brought back that idea of censorship that we talked about during the Enlightenment, or where we limited certain ideas to prevent people from speaking negatively of the war. Now, this propaganda was used to spread ideas to promote a cause or to damage an opposing cause. Typically, they were used to motivate mobilization and joining the war effort, and typically they also highlighted atrocities or horrible acts committed against innocent people. Like the aforementioned Lusitania sinking, a lot of World War I propaganda featured the destruction and sinking of the Lusitania as one of those atrocities that the Germans had been committing. So we also have a lot of women joining the war effort as well, with pride and confidence. They directly challenged the idea that women couldn't handle the demanding and dangerous jobs, and they replaced men who left to fight. Now, they typically went into the war industry, so producing planes, vehicles, and tanks, but they also began to form their own branches of the armed forces, like WAC, or the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. They also became nurses, and they played sport. They used this as a way to help win the right to vote. They did this by getting involved in a number of ways. By, again, like I said, going to work or becoming auxiliary nurses. Now, morale began to collapse. And we'll talk more about this when we get to Section 5, but there was a revolution in Russia forming. And in March 1917, due to the war, there was a bread riot in St. Petersburg that led to the end of the Russian monarchy. Now, the Allies were hopeful for a democratic government, but that's not what's going to happen, where we're going to see a communist government to come to power, led by Vladimir Lenin, this gentleman right here. Now, due to this, Russia decided, yeah, we're done with the war. We're out. And they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which ended their participation in World War I. Now the Eastern Front is no longer in play. The Germans now could focus on solely the Western Front and go from there. Now eventually, the U.S. saved the day. Due to a lot of cultural ties with the Allies, with France also being a democracy, Germans' unrestricted submarine warfare got worse, and to add salt to the wound was something known as the Zimmerman Note, in which the German Foreign Minister, Arthur Zimmerman, plotted to get Mexico to join the war. In exchange, once the war was over, they'd help them invade the United States and reconquer their lost territories in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if Mexico attacked us. And we're like, yeah, nope, we're done. We're getting involved in the war now to shut it down. So we declared war under the leadership of President Woodrow Wilson, who said in April 1917 against Germany that we were joining the war to make the world safe for democracy, and that World War I, or at least back then known as the Great War, was the war to end all wars. And by 1918, we were ready to enter, and we were a much-needed morale boost to the Allies, who had been fighting for over 3 years now, and they were losing. And they were losing hope that they were going to win. And then here come the Americans ready to showboat and save the day. So, something we have to talk about is Wilson's 14 points. Now, this was a list of Wilson's terms for resolving this and any future wars. They included things like freedom of the seas, free trade, a large-scale reduction of arms for everybody, an end to those secret treaties that led so many countries into the war, and Eastern European self-determination to let people choose their own governments, and a general association of nations to keep the peace. We know this as the League of Nations. So, victory at last. With the last big offensive, the American aid helped push the Allies back. Helped the Allies push the Germans back. And as a result, there was a number of uprisings in Germany, and Kaiser Wilhelm stepped down and was exiled. There was also a number of revolts breaking out in Austria-Hungary. And with that came the armistice, which was an agreement to end the fighting. On the 11th month, on the 11th day, at the 11th hour, World War I ended. Now, on a U.S. history note, we also celebrate this Armistice Day as Veterans Day here in the United States. Alright, that is it for notes for today. So your assignment is going to be another one of those shag packets on the Armistice, and we're also going to be taking a break from the notes for a little bit to do a project, but I'll explain that more to you all in class. I'll see y'all next time. Bye, everyone.